Hello, welcome to Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Jacobites, the exhibition for the summer of 2017 here at National Museum Scotland. My name is David Forsyth and I'm a curator in the Department of Scottish History and Archaeology here at National Museum Scotland.
And my name is Maureen Barrie and I'm an exhibition officer at the National Museums of Scotland who's had the privilege and pleasure of working with David for the last 2 years on this project. And one of the areas that we're actually in at the moment was the one that we found the most fascinating to develop, and that's the section on the court in Rome, All Roads Lead to Rome.
This is the largest exhibition on the Jacobites for over 70 years. And one of the main features we wanted to show in the exhibition was the story of the exiled Jacobite Stuarts, both in France and in Rome. No matter what you think about the Jacobite Stuarts, the fact that they were a duly constituted court in their own eyes is very important. And
I think the interesting thing about the court in Rome, it was an unofficial embassy for the British people doing the grand tour or whatever.
Exactly. The many British citizens would visit here, would come and try and see the kings and princes, but of course don't tell the royal family when you get back home because it would be considered to be a seditious act.
But the court was really vibrant. The music in the court was legendary. People talked about going to these receptions at the Jacobite court where you could hear the best music in Rome. And it's interesting how James VIII eventually ended up in Rome. I mean, he had to leave France.
The court in Rome really dates to about 1719. In 1688, James VII, as you know, exiled himself to France, courtesy of Louis XIV at the Chateau Saint-Germain-en-Laye. Thanks to shifting diplomatic machinations and war at the time, he eventually had to leave France. He was forced to leave France by the Treaty of Utrecht. They settle at the Palace Muti,
which was renamed the Palace del Rey after James moved in. And interestingly, the Pope paid for the property, paid for the refurbishment, of which James was quite exacting because he wouldn't settle just anywhere in Rome. He demanded a garden and a palace that would take all his courtiers. So it wasn't just this ad hoc building in Rome, was it?
No, not at all. We've got to remember that James very much saw himself as the true king of the three kingdoms of Scotland, England and Ireland. But what's interesting, I think, is the interplay between the court in Rome and the supporters back home. And that's what Maureen and I want to show you in this film.
And I think it's really interesting because we looked at the idea of courtiers in Rome and courtiers that were coming to Rome who were great supporters of the Jacobites. And I think in this section we've taken two objects that are associated directly with Bonnie Prince Charlie and looked at them again because they were found in the baggage wagons after the Battle of Culloden, and we always felt there was more to the story. And I think the story, the 4 years prior to them in 1746 being found in the baggage wagons, is fascinating.
Well, this puts them in their proper context. So they were sent as gifts fit for a Jacobite prince from supporters back home. There's two sets of objects that we want to look at this evening. The first one here is this targe and backsword. Now, these were sent out as part of a full set of Highland clothes by James Drummond, the 3rd Duke of Perth, a leading Jacobite supporter back home in Scotland.
And the reason he sent it wasn't just as a gift, a trophy gift, whatever. It had a real political message. And I think that's the interesting thing about him giving the clothes and the weapons and telling Charles, don't forget how important these are.
Exactly. Although Charles wore them, never for war, the sword was never drawn in anger, the targe, as you can see, has been decorated with these beautiful silver matisse or mounts, not intended for war, but intended to show Charles as a Highland chief. And certainly when he came back to Scotland in 1745, James Drummond reminded Charles that that's how he'd be expected to dress.
And I don't think Charles forgot that, because in the exhibition, when you leave this section, and Charles, the image of Charles is in European costume as a European prince. But when you come to the other part of the exhibition and you see Charles has landed in Scotland, he's dressed in tartan.
Yeah. After the raising of his father's standard at Glenfinnan, Charles largely wore tartan, but at times, important times, he would be seen in European dress.
And well, that's the thing that I find most interesting. The one portrait that we know of that was painted in Scotland, Charles isn't wearing Highland dress.
No, he's not. He's wearing European standard court couture, and he's wearing not the Order of the Thistle, the Premier Order of Scotland, but the Order of the Garter, the Premier Order of England. This was a painting made for an English and European audience. But looking at the Taj, there's a very important clue that we can be quite clear that James Drummond, the Duke of Perth, commissioned these and sent them over to his
because
prince.
sometimes it's not easy to actually place a strong attribution on
Objects can be difficult to decipher, and this one is. At the position of 1 o'clock and 7 o'clock, the little motif is that of a Scotch bonnet with traditional Scottish arms. But if you look very carefully at the Scotch bonnet, on the badge has the motto crest and St Andrew badge of James Drummond, 3rd Duke of Perth. Now, he was made a Knight of the Thistle in 1739. We can date this Taj to 1739 from the records that exist, so we think it's highly likely that this was commissioned by the Duke of Perth as really a thank you for being provided with this order.
But interestingly, other commissions included the portraits of Prince Charles and Prince Henry's brother.
Yes.
Behind me, and they're about the time that these gifts were being made.
Well, this is an important time because Charles is on the cusp of his 21st birthday. He's coming of age. He's the warrior prince, as can be seen in this portrait here. He's the prince in waiting. Mm-hmm. But of course, not all supporters revealed themselves. We have here, Maureen, too, as you know, the travelling canteen of Charles Edward Stuart. Charles, as many young aristocratic and royal men, was fond of hunting. And this would have been a travelling canteen, splendid it would be, but intended to be used on the hunt.
But it was made in Edinburgh?
It was made in Edinburgh, that's what we do know. It was made in Edinburgh in 1740, 1741, but it was made by Jacobite. Now we know this.
How?
Because it's marked for Ebenezer Oliphant, who not only was a leading Edinburgh goldsmith, but he was a leading Edinburgh goldsmith, Jacobite at the time.
So the person who commissioned it didn't want to be known, and going to Oliphant was a safe bet that you wouldn't be revealed.
He would not be revealed. It is an object that is both
Doesn't
exquisite.
Help us, though, knowing
no,
who made
who was it? It's an object which is both exquisite, but more importantly, seditious. For on the front, the little cartouche, the little badge, shows the Prince of Wales' feathers, Ich dien, I serve. This was not intended for Prince Frederick of Hanover. This was intended for the Prince over the water by a Jacobite supporter. Furthermore, linking to the connection, the very important connection of the ancient and most noble Order of the Thistle, round the rim, around the lid of the canteen, it's been chased with the thistle and rue from the collar badge of the Order of the Thistle. And on the top, the lid is surmounted by the badge of St Andrew and Glory, which would have been the knight badge, as the princes are wearing behind us, from that very same order.
And interestingly, both pieces he brought with him. And they were in Holyrood Palace, and they accompanied him on his travels down south, when he came back north, at Culloden when they were seized from the baggage wagons.
They were seized from the baggage wagon. And we know these are important objects because Charles Edward bemoans the fact that he's lost them.
And I think that's the interesting thing is, this exhibition takes you in so many different routes, and the final section doesn't end in Scotland. It goes back to France, and it goes back to Rome, and it introduces Henry, the younger brother, and Charles declines. And it's such a fascinating story to have actually found out all that information about Henry, and a fitting end to the exhibition to see the Jacobites rehabilitated into the royal family, the British royal family.
Of course, because Henry in a way becomes a very successful spiritual prince as a cardinal of the Catholic Church, he's a prince of the church. Charles, a less successful temporal prince. So we see that sad ending, but also that way that the father and the two sons are reunited in death in the Basilica of St Peter's in Rome. Which is
one of three of the objects that we were so delighted to actually find and bring to Scotland, and those are the grave markers from St Peter's Basilica.
From the
Scots. More.
Yeah.
Well, housed in the Scots College.
So the exhibition reaches the end with the death of the king and his two sons, and we hope that you're able to come and see the exhibition before the 12th of November when it closes. Thank you.